Welcome to The Green Rush, a podcast about the business of cannabis. On a weekly basis, hosts Ann Donahoe and Louis Goldberg talk with the CEOs, politicians, and cultural icons driving the cannabis industry forward. This week, Ann and Louis speak with Nate Nienhuis and Taz Turner from Canadian cannabis company CordovaCann, which is focusing its investments on the U.S. market. Chief Operating Officer Nate is eminently qualified, having worked both sides of the border as head horticulturist at dispensaries in California, Arizona, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and Washington, D.C., as well as in Canada. While Nate focuses on the plant itself, Taz keeps things running as the chairman and CEO. This is an episode you do not want to miss. Don't sit back, lean forward. And now onto our interview with Nate Nienhuis and Taz Turner.
So Taz and Nate, thank you guys so much for being here. We're excited to chat with you. Before we jump in, we've had some feedback that we're not always great at telling our listeners who exactly the company is we're talking to. We tend to just jump right in. So can you tell us and our listeners in your own words about CordovaCann, what it is you guys do, and what's your mission?
Sure. Thanks for having us. This is Taz. I'll take that one. So at CordovaCann, we're really building a global cannabis business. We've started by focusing on the U.S. States in the Western U.S. because we feel that those are the more developed markets where there's significant revenue and cash flow already being generated. And then our plan is to move internationally, initially through Canada, because the regulatory framework is set up there to move internationally, and then also move east into the rest of the United States and beyond, really.
So the slogan of that you guys have been working with is "The opportunity is now," which seems just really fitting since you're based in Canada, and Canada is legalizing adult use cannabis on October 17th. But you also seem very focused on the U.S. Can you talk about how you are investing in the U.S. and what that strategy is for you guys?
Sure. Yeah, so the opportunity is now quote there. It really does apply globally. Obviously, it certainly applies in Canada as we start to build product there and also start to build our base for export. And it also applies to internationally because there's a lot of international governments that are adopting frameworks for the legalization of cannabis, and there is demand, which Nate can speak to probably more directly than I can, for cannabis products that are built in the U.S. and even more specifically, probably born and bred in California. Doesn't mean we can actually build them there, but in terms of the brands that have been built there, we can build them in different jurisdictions and allow those brands to be sold internationally. But yeah, more directly to your question, it certainly applies to the U.S. Everyone has seen the data on it in terms of the acceptance across the consumer base across the country, regardless of where you live in and what state you live in. So, that acceptance, the idea that California is only 9 months into accepting recreational cannabis, the idea that other states are adopting cannabis legislation in the coming elections, all of that, leads to, we think now is the right time to be investing in this space, and great companies are going to be built. They've already started being built, and they're going to be built over the next few years here.
So you guys both have different roles in the organization. Taz, you're the financial guy, the corporate guy, and Nate, you're the grower. You're the man who knows more about the plant than probably anybody else. And it's really, you have a unique history because back in 2012, you were one of the first to operate in D.C., which is unbelievably unique. So what was that like when you started working in Washington?
It was a really interesting experience. It was unnerving to start. I came from Southern California to go out there, and it was kind of a big step. It basically took me out of an environment I was very comfortable working with, surrounded by relationships that had been built over many years, and kind of dropped me into a whole new world that was surrounded by tons of regulatory bodies and very confined spaces. So it was really interesting. The original program in D.C. was based on exclusively on palliative care, as opposed to the ability to be more specific at ailment directed therapies. So it was tough because that was not only that DC isn't a very big market, but that consumer base in that market was also not very big. But it allowed us to get a ton of feedback from people that were going through some of the toughest times in their life or the end of their life. And so it was a very compassionate program. I believe it served the intent of the beginning of the program. We've all observed that has grown significantly since and expanded into, other consumer bases, and has effectively all but been completely legalized within the District of Columbia.
It's a strange adult use program, right? I mean, it's like there's no stores, but you can have it. You can grow it yourself, but you can't. I mean,
there's no commerce to it. You can't sell it. You can give it away, but you can't charge for any of it. It's very unique that way. It's a kind of a communal concept, but it was weird because obviously anything more than that would have bumped right into federal laws, and anything less, they were going to have an uprising. So they had to find a way to accommodate.
You must have had to deal with regulators and more importantly, Congress people, legislators, as you were working back then and through the move towards adult use. So I have a really important question. What was your favorite strain? I'm kidding.
We started with in DC. Well, I would look at it perhaps differently than a consumer would have, because I looked at it from the one that I believed not only could I produce most efficaciously, but also that would have the best reaction by the market. So it would be best suited for what their needs were.
All right. Well, then what was it?
It was probably a fairly old school skunk dominant Jack Herrera.
I love Jack Herrera.
So Taz, while Nate was talking weeds and politics, your background is in financial services. So can you talk a little bit about your cannabis story? How did you get to here? To channel my inner Liz Lemon.
Yeah. No, I like to call it, the sharp left-hand turn that I took. My background's in private equity. Spent the last, 15 plus years in the hedge fund world. I worked, I did mostly tech, internet, and consumer, and did, kind of ran the tech and internet portfolios for a $5 billion plus hedge fund for some time in New York. I then went out on my own in 2010. And in 2012, made my first cannabis investment in the Canadian market. And actually, it was around that time that I met Nate. And so I've known Nate for quite some time. Made a bunch of investments in the Canadian market. Did relatively well. Certainly, if I had the foresight to know where the Canadian market would be today, I would have done much better. But yeah, it was the last. After doing that and spending my time there, thinking it was. I don't want to say played out, but in terms of, my kind of institutional way I looked at things, thought it had kind of played out to some degree. Started focusing on the U.S. opportunities about 3 years ago. And Nate and I started talking about this probably, a little bit, before, around that time, about, 2 years ago. I was helping at that time a number of U.S. companies get Canadian investors, because I had the lines into kind of the Canadian banks and the Canadian investment community in this space. And so in doing that, it was great. There were some interesting companies, but I think really what started the conversation between Nate and myself and others was the fact that, we thought there was a better way to do it. And so that was kind of the start of Cordova.
Can I ask how you guys first met?
Was it love at first sight?
Well, I can, not trying to blow smoke up anyone's ass, but he, listen, I mean, somebody with his background and his knowledge, it was something that allowed me to feel very comfortable.
What is his background? Because, I know that, Nate is a name, but what is your background, Nate? Like, who are you?
How long do you want this interview to be? No, it's I've been doing this for many, many years now. Basically, went medically legal in 96 in California. And I had an engineering background. And so friends and colleagues would approach me and say, hey, look, I've got a relative that's dealing with cancer, and I read about this on the internet, but I don't know how to turn any of this stuff on. How do I make it work? And so that was really how it started, I could help people put together a small personal grow that was legal in California in their home to provide for themselves. And so that was where it all kind of began, and then it just continued to grow and scale. And we went from those small personal operations to larger, more commercial operations, and then the government started to get involved, and you started to see state programs. Obviously, Colorado was one of the first that really launched a bigger, more recognizable state program, but they ran into a lot of the same issues. Everyone was excited about it, and not that many people knew how to turn it on. So, that was where I was able to participate heavily in that regard. And then that all kind of just has continued to roll in. Taz and I met on one of the first Canadian projects that I was participating in. And so he was involved on the investment side. I was involved on the operations side. And Taz was probably one of the first and maybe still the only bankers that I don't, I find tolerable to spend extra time than just the meeting. So.
Aw, Taz, you're tolerable.
Well, yeah, I know. That's about the extent of it. No, but I mean,
feel the love.
I do think that, like, in terms of background, I mean, Nate's rather humble. I mean, in terms of, his, obviously the experience before the DC program, but then after that, I think, leveraging that into both, governments kind of all over the world, as well as into, commercial operations into, international countries. I think it led me to basically my first call on a number of different investment opportunities that I was looking at over the last 7 years was to him. And quite frankly, he probably got tired of me calling him about all this stuff and said, hey, why don't we do something a little bit more productive than you wasted my time. So that's kind of how it all started.
So don't take this the wrong way, Taz, but you kind of represent the suits in this industry, right? And Nate, you're the historic growers, and there's been this tension between the suits. We call it the suits and the stoners. Nate, how did you overcome that inherent distrust of the guys who wear ties to say, yeah, I want to go into business with him?
Who said it was overcome?
I didn't. He still has to bribe me and con me into putting a suit on for meetings, and he can vouch for that. Most of the time, you're lucky if you catch me wearing shoes. So,
right.
But it is challenging, and I don't mind admitting I've learned a lot of lessons the good old-fashioned hard way when it comes to knowing how to protect oneself in that world. They're good at what they do the same way guys from my world are good at what they do. So it is challenging, but it's been a really fun educational process. I've learned, I've always maintained an attitude that the day I show up to work and I don't learn something, then that's on me, and I need to find something else to do. And this industry has created an amazing opportunity for me personally that I really appreciate, is the opportunity to learn every single day and improve not only my trade, but the industry as a whole. And so there's been a lot of challenges along the way, not just for us, but anyone that's been watching the industry has seen it happen, where things didn't always go to plan, but we're getting there and everyone's getting better at it. So it goes hand in hand, because, there is that inherent distrust for guys in the suits, but the bottom line is they had a really hard time trusting guys like us. So, and for understandable reasons. We come from a world that they didn't understand either. So it's getting better, and there's going to be sharks in the water on both sides, and hopefully that it's improving. But I think it was equally challenging for the guys in suits to feel confident and comfortable approaching the industry guys, because it was another world for them too.
You guys are vertically integrated, right? but there are a lot of guys out there. So what would you say makes Cordova different than, say, a Green Thumb or any of the other vertically integrated companies? What is the unique value proposition to you?
Yeah, I mean, this may sound trite, but I think, it probably starts with the focus on the West Coast and in California in particular, but really the West Coast. And, some people say mature. I would much rather use the term developed markets because those markets, quite frankly, are the ones that are generating significant revenue. They're generating cash flow by the operators. Yeah, a lot of what the public sees in terms of the public market, those operations aren't scalable, but there's a number of scalable operations on the West Coast. And our focus has been to focus on those states where there truly is scale. And really, one of our main goals over the next 12 to 18 months is show the true scalability of this cannabis market or of this, cannabis operations in particular. Because I don't think that's well understood by the suits like me. I mean, I think the way that the investors in this and understand this game is that, scale in this market is 100, 150, 200 million in revenue before you make your first profit dollar, because that's what the public companies in this space have trained the investor to believe. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of profit in this business that's already been shown by a lot of guys in the hills over the last 50 years, and we want to kind of bring that to the forefront in the coming months and quarters.
Can you describe, I mean, and does this apply, does what you just said apply to both the U.S. and the Canadian market? Or are you, period, end of question?
I think in terms of the Canadian market, it's a little bit different tact for us. I think the Canadian market, sure, we're entering the Canadian market, sure. Will we play there? Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is to take, massive market share in Canada. There's a number of players with significantly deep pockets to go at that market. Doesn't mean that we can't get any of it, but it's certainly, it also is not a massive market in terms of the domestic market in Canada. The real play for us in moving into Canada is really the regulatory framework that it provides to serve as the, export jumping off point for the international markets. And in terms of your question, I think it'll be a different construct in terms of the operating model for most of the international revenues initially, because it'll be a truly import-export, really just export business to those markets. So it's just sale for what, selling a product for X amount of profit. But no, I think, over time, as those markets develop in their own right, you should certainly see the scalability, and we'd like to play in those markets as well. But, first things first, I think it's moving to Canada for the export market and leveraging a number of the relationships, quite frankly, that our team has, and specifically Nate has quite a few to be able to sell into those markets.
We're talking, just to remind our audience, since it's been about 15 minutes since we started doing this, that we're talking with Taz Turner and Nate Nienhuis from CordovaCann. Taz, you've been saying how much you're focused on the West Coast and California in particular. And as a relatively open market, it's super hyper competitive, right? There's lots of companies in California that you are competing with. Why not target more limited license states like Massachusetts or New Jersey, where if you get a license and because you guys are good at doing what you do, it's almost a license to print money versus the cauldron that is California?
I guess it's a two-pronged answer. One is the volume and the size of the California market, is massive in comparison to those other, nascent markets. And then I think the second part of that answer is sure, you can be one of the first, however many X players enters nascent market, A, B, or C. But, we've seen in every market time and time again that those state governments issue more and more licenses, right? So the initial licenses come out for however many, people to play, I'm making numbers up here, but a third of those guys get out of the blocks fast and make a dent in the market and gain market share. A third of those guys, build something and are playing in it, but not, making the money that they thought they were going to make with stars in their eyes, and they turn back to their old, jobs of whatever they were doing prior to this. And then a third of those guys never get, farther than the piece of paper that they got, right? And so what we've seen is the devaluation of those licenses over time in all of these markets. And so, certainly there will be a market that proves this theory wrong. But in every market that I've seen to date, certainly in the U.S., as new licenses are issued, that piece of paper becomes less and less valuable. And sure, there's value to being, first to market. But in terms of creating a brand, or brands on the West Coast, that we think that that's the quickest way to scale, and then moving those brands into those more nascent markets, while not easy, certainly feels like the more appropriate approach for us to take, and we can decide, quite frankly, when to enter those more nascent markets at a time when they're the size that matters to us, right? And so there's a number of players out there that have made moves in markets that they thought would come online much quicker than they have, and so why not take a wait and see approach, and then go whole hog into it when we're ready.
Relatively speaking, the legitimate legal cannabis market is young, and you're very early in the life of CordovaCann as a company. Can you talk about, why go public so early in your company's history, and why not wait? What benefits are there? Because you trade publicly on the CSE, when we'll make sure we have a ticker, a link to the ticker in the show notes. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the ticker CDVA on the CSE. We recently went public on the CSE. We're also listed, have been listed historically on the OTC under the ticker LVRLF. But yeah, I mean, I think you have to remember that pre kind of the Sessions, January 4th Sessions, proclamation that didn't put people back on their heels in terms of investment, and then obviously the reversal of course in the months after that. We started this prior to all of that, and the idea with going public was pretty simple. It was an access to capital. 9 months ago, the only access to capital outside of high net worth individuals in the U.S. was the Canadian public market. So it just made sense. It was the quickest way to gain scale in the market, and that in addition to that, I think. Beyond the capital, the ability to raise capital in Canada, the other piece of that is the public market just provides optionality. It allows you to go out and, whether it's make acquisitions, whether it's position yourselves in a certain light. I mean, there's a lot of optionality to being public versus being private, and that was the road we decided to take, but mostly for capital reasons.
We are taping this on October 5th, which is just 12 days before Canada becomes a fully adult use country. How does this affect you guys? And is there going to be a ticker tape parade, or actually not ticker tape, but it would be like a lot of rolling papers flying around?
That is a great question. How does it affect us? I mean, certainly it brings, obviously it brings cannabis one more step forward in terms of acceptance on a global scale. In terms of how we're going to operate, I don't think it changes one thing, but yeah, I mean, certainly it pushes forward our international strategy, right? Because the regulatory framework continues to shape up and allow us to move towards providing a suite of products towards the international markets and towards the Canadian market, when we're ready.
We know that it's been widely reported that there is a commission, a group within the White House that is looking at federal policy on cannabis right now. Not historically, but since he's been elected, Trump has kind of made noises that he is pro-pot. But we have this other side of it where he's got this group that's saying, how do we actually slow this down? What do you, as somebody who has worked in D.C., what do you think is happening, and what do you think the reality of some sort of either descheduling or legalization during the Trump administration is?
Whether or not it happens in the Trump administration is anyone's best guess. I mean, we've obviously observed he's not afraid to make volatile decisions as needed. But from my understanding, from the interactions I've had, it will be largely a political move. So whether that goes on the next, ballot with regard to the next presidential election, or, I mean, as we commented on earlier, there's a huge public acceptance across the country, at least especially for the medical consumption. Obviously, a little different for recreational, but that's would be my anticipation of how it would push forward. I think the government's very clear on what the regulated program would look like, and I'm sure that they have a game plan for implementation. But it'll draw on a lot of different things, because it would not operate the way a state program runs. It would have, you would see the federal regulatory bodies that are now responsible for enforcement and oversight and all those things. So there's a lot of different components that would need to gear up just to participate in it. And so there is that. I would assume that's what the commission is working on, is those components. And then, when it ends up being part of someone's political strategy is probably the most likely time that it will have a real chance of adjusting from where it stands today from a legal standpoint.
If it gets legalized, whenever, what impact does that have on you?
Well, the good news is that I've had my own fair share of experience working in those types of regulated environments, and so our facility design and operational concept are compliant with that type of an environment. It is going to represent a real challenge for the industry as a whole, as most of us that have looked into the industry can observe. Is there's a pretty good variety of different regulatory concepts from state to state, and obviously a federal program would nationalize that, and so there'd be a learning curve for a lot of the existing state agencies. And you'll probably see some of them push back on states' rights to allow them to continue with their own program and just keep the feds out of it. But who knows how that's going to go as well.
I guess in light of that, or maybe just putting that aside, what's next for you guys as a company? So what do the next 6 months, 12 months look like for you?
Yeah,
and that's to Taz or to Nate, whoever wants to answer that one.
This is Taz. I'll take that. I think you'll see quite a few things. I think you'll see us, expand our operational abilities in California. I think you'll see us move into other states on the West Coast and possibly moving east. You'll see us get this Canadian LP up and moving into, international agreements for export. And I think you'll also see us move into or start utilizing the technology that we acquired part of a couple of months back to allow us to have a competitive advantage relative to the other players in the markets that we serve. And certainly Nate's more of the right person to be talking about this. So I'll hand it off.
Okay, so I can talk about this for quite some time. Maybe if you have some specific questions about it, I can more tailor my answer. What would you like to know?
I guess let's talk about, what this technology does. So it's a company out of Canada called NWN. Do I have that right? And what does this do? It seems to have a really scalable impact on what you guys can do across state lines and across country lines, right? And you can be using this technology in Canada, and you can be using it in the U.S. I guess maybe just give us the 30,000 foot view on that and what it does. Sure.
So the concept was, and you hit on it pretty accurately there with regard to from a legal standpoint, who knows how far away from being able to have state-to-state commerce or even true international commerce with the United States. So what are the general concept of the technology to start was, okay, how do we standardize a platform where the same product can be built in multiple places, but we can have effectively a true consistent product from different manufacturing sites wherever they may be located. So we started with asking the fundamental questions of what is the challenge in doing that now? And one of the wonderful things about working with cannabis is that you're working with a very natural set of compounds that come directly from the plant and are otherwise unadulterated in any way. No additives. We're not over processing them or doing anything else to them like, typical pharmaceuticals would have done. And, the hard part is that that's such a unique suite of compounds and terpenes and just, all of nature's perfect combination there, that it's basically impossible to do it on a synthetic platform and have the same efficacy or experience. And so we started with on the technology was, okay, how do we take this all the way backwards apart and isolate it by compound and identify a roadmap for creating that product line that's mimicking nature's already well done recipe. And so we developed technology where we're able to reverse engineer that. And then taking it from there, we took it to say, okay, how do we isolate the different components within this lineup as far as what's causing which personal effect, whether that be for treatment in a medical case or perceived impact on a recreational consumer. And so we've got a great team of scientists in Canada, 30 full-time scientists that work on this all day, every day, and they really love their jobs. And so we've developed those roadmaps and those recipes, and because we're working with isolated compounds, we can map out the whole recipe and literally put satellite manufacturing facilities in each of the respective jurisdictions and be able to build to that roadmap the precise product profile that we've already proven has a desired effect. And so that's where it started. And then from there, we went on to develop technology that will increase the production of certain compounds within the plant that we needed in greater volume than nature perhaps would provide for us. And so we're able to specifically target that in the cultivation side of things and increase the efficiency of overall production that way. So there's a lot of small moving parts, but that was the 30,000 foot view of the intended target of what this technology is doing. And it's a really neat opportunity because it's ever growing. For the same way, as breeders, we build plants, we hybridize different types of genetics to achieve desired goals. We're the same outcomes will be true from the ongoing research that we're doing in the lab to continue to develop new and more exciting combinations of these compounds to give the consumer what they either need or want on a very consistent basis.
So let's stick with that theme for a second. I mean, you Nate, are the king of the plant. And we've talked with lots of people who say that they're great at growing and lots of people that say, well, our strains are the best. What does it really take to be good at growing at scale? Like if you're going to be growing for hundreds or if not thousands of pounds, what does it take to do that?
Well, it is very different than what you would say most people have had experience at. A 10,000 square foot facility is not the same as 10 1,000 square foot facilities. They just simply don't function the same way. And that compounds up as you continue to grow to effectively any scale you can think of. So there's a whole lot of different challenges along that path. Kind of depends on what your goal is. Anytime that someone asks me, hey, what would you do in this situation? How would you design this? Or what equipment do I need? First question to ask yourself is, what product do you want to come out the other end? Because that dictates everything you do to get there. And I think a lot of the challenges people face is that they start by buying, retrofitting, or purpose building a facility, and then they find out at the end, it's like, well, it builds a product, but not the one we wanted. What do we do now? And that's a result of, in my opinion, approaching the sequence in reverse order. Identifying what your intended product line is will outline the path of travel to get there for someone who's had commercial industrial experience in cannabis production. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, a lot of guys who have tried to make that transition though from being an illicit, either outdoor grower or greenhouse grower and going to commercial. I mean, is there a lesson that you can say to them, or say, hey, don't make this, like, if you can be specific and say, like, this is a stupid mistake that you can easily avoid, what would that be?
Be very patient and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you've got yourself into a spot that you didn't know how to handle, and really focus on the fact that you have to play by the rules. And you will be checked, that you are being watched, and it's a different world. And that's probably the toughest transition coming from anybody that's in even a gray market area, is most of their practices are, an artwork to them. It's something that they've done out of a passionate love for however long they've been doing it. And that's wonderful. And that attitude and that spirit in their work is great. But when you combine that with a regulatory requirement to be compliant with specific things along the way, it gets really frustrating, because you keep getting your hands slapped. It's like, no, this is how I do this. Well, that's how you used to do that. Now you have to do it this way, or at least you can't do it that way. And so that's why I said be patient, because you're going to have to relearn a lot of what you do, because you can't do it the way you used to do it anymore. And it is very challenging. And that's why a lot of times they get a different result out of the end of the assembly process, that they're scratching their head going, well, this isn't what I normally got from this. It's because it was changed along the way.
Taz, let's take a similar approach to you. You were not a public company CEO. Now you're a public company CEO, and you come out of the capital markets. But what are the lessons that you've learned being a CEO of a public company that you could translate to people who are thinking like, oh, I can do that, I want to do that? Or like, what is the thing that like oh shit, I didn't think of this moment? Like, what would you tell somebody who's thinking about this?
I mean, I've had a lot of oh shit moments, and the tenure hasn't been all that long. I mean, what I can say is that we tried from we talked about building this well before we set the plan in motion. And, I tried to mitigate as many of those moments as possible. And a number of those moments were actually mitigated but I didn't know it at the time. And it's really just, it's a function of, bringing the best people around the table as possible. And, quite honestly, I wouldn't be doing this right now if it wasn't, if there wasn't somebody like Nate on the other side to be able to give that operational focus and expertise. And that also goes with a lot of the regulatory stuff in Canada. I mean, certainly my background, I'm a U.S. guy. I certainly invested in Canadian markets, but in terms of knowing the ins and outs of those markets and on the security side, that was not my background. So we have people that have been, addressing that and that have that expertise. So we try to basically map this out from the beginning to hit all those areas. And so, yeah, I mean, have there been moments? Certainly, but yeah, we're still building the team, right? To continue to and building it the right way. I think, having seen a number of different management teams, come at this space, there was no prototype, right? I mean, this market's only been really in existence in the public market for the last, 7 years, and I've seen basically everyone in it, and so. You can also learn from their mistakes and see how they built things, whether rightly or wrongly. And I think at the end of the day, when we set out to do this, we set out to do it the right way to the best of our ability. And so that's what we've tried to do, in surrounding ourselves with the right people to get that done.
So we have a new segment this week that we are wrapping the show with. We are going to set out Puff Puff Pass to drift slowly off into the night. And we are replacing it with a segment we are calling While You Were Sleeping. We're workshopping that name. Lewis likes it. Anne's on the fence. Shay probably agrees with Anne. But let's talk about what's the one thing that we've been missing. In other words, what's the one story that you're not seeing written, or what's the that one random regulation that's kind of going to creep up on everybody, or what are we missing? Very open-ended to whoever wants it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I'm sure Nate has a very different answer, but I'll probably go back to something I've said and I'll continue to say kind of ad infinitum. And I really think that, it's the story of what is the operational scalability of this business. And I don't think people know that right now. I really don't. I think that because, yes, you've seen it on the black market in some markets. Yes, you've seen it, by certain companies project what they're going to do in certain public markets, but nobody knows what the real operational scalability of this business is, whether it be on a state-by-state basis or a global company basis. And really that's what we're trying to set out to prove, in my mind, over the next, 12 to 24 months. And so I think that's the story that I'd like to see written, whether it's about Cordova or anybody else, to try to prove out what the real business model is here beyond just what we see in the public market today. I'm sure Nate has a very different answer, but.
Well, it's somewhat linked to that. It's kind of, I would go back to something you guys touched on earlier when it comes to federal legalization in the U.S. And my advice when asked that question is be careful what you wish for, because it will change the game in a significant way. And you're going to, if you think there's a lot of regulation right now, there's comparatively none. It's going to get really, really interesting for even some of the most experienced operators at the state level to be able to be compliant on a federal level with those regulations and those governing bodies, and just the myriad of rules that are going to come along with that. And I think that's, while I agree that it's coming, I think there's a lot of work that the industry needs to do to prepare itself for that. It's
do you think the industry is
green flag racing?
Are they doing that? I mean, you talk to your peers. Are they planning for, another 3 to 5 years of federal prohibition and state acceptance? Or are they all like, okay, we're ready. We've got our SOPs in place. We've got our governance in place. We're ready to start working under a new regulatory regime. Or are they going to be like, oh shit, we're not ready for this?
I would say the smart guy is somewhere in between. I would say anybody that is so confident that they have SOPs, for example, complete and ready to go, that would be someone who's gearing up for a real tough road. It's something they can be started on, but to say that they would be completely confident that they're completed with it, that's tough. Now, most of the conversation I hear still agrees we're probably 3 to 5 years out, just based on the political environment that exists right now and has for, numbers of years. But it could happen anytime. You never know what kind of political motivation can come at any given moment and can create some kind of a significant change in that. And it could go in either direction, to be completely fair. There could be more pushback on the industry than what there is today. I don't anticipate that at all, but anything can happen. But it's definitely going to represent significant challenges for every operator in the U.S. right now, and I'm confident that there are several that will be able to step up and meet those requirements. But I'm also very confident that there's many, many more that will very much so struggle with that. And then they're going to go, that's what I commented on earlier. Those are the guys that are going to go and complain to their respective states to say, hey, this was our program. They just came along. What right do they have to do that? And, it's just going to be one of those, it'll be a learning experience for everyone, but I do believe it's coming. But that's what I would be paying attention to as far as being as prepared as possible.
Okay. So, this is a forum for you guys. Is there anything that we've missed? Anything you want to touch on? Anything you want our listeners to hear?
No, I'm good. I really appreciate you having us on. Cool.
Well, this was a great conversation. We really appreciate your guys' time. We know it's Friday afternoon and almost happy hour wherever you are. So thank you.
Actually, more importantly, it's almost 4:20.
Well, we still have, but it's still a work day. Well, every day. Oh, that's another comment for everyone. Every day is a work day. 365 days a year. The plants don't take a break, so neither do we.
That was awesome. Thank you, guys. That's it for us. A huge thanks to Nate Nienhuis and Taz Turner from CordovaCann, a Canadian cannabis listed company. They trade on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the ticker symbol CDVA and on the OTC under the ticker symbol LVRLF. Full disclosure, they are a KCSA client. You should check them out at CordovaCann.com, and that's CordovaCann.com. I hope you had a pen ready, or at least back up 15 seconds so you can hear me say that again. If you want to chat with us, with me or Ann, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter with the handle at KCSA_cannabis, as well as at our website, which is kcsa-cannabis.com, or drop us an email. And I recently got my first piece of hate mail. Woohoo! I was so excited. It's because I'm a bleeding heart progressive. But drop us an email at greenrush@kcsa.com. And please don't forget to subscribe to the Green Rush in your favorite podcatcher. Hey, that's one take, Shay. One take.